Okay, today is June 21st, 2022. I am Aaron Fountain with the Cleveland Restoration Society, and I am interviewing Linda Sowell. Is that correct?
Linda Jackson Sowell.
Oh, Linda Jackson Sowell. Okay.
Like Powell.
Oh, okay. And we are in Shaker Heights, Ohio, at her home. So, all right, I'm glad that you appreciate to do this, and I'll start off with the first question. It's something I like to ask everybody. Can you tell me about yourself? When and where were you born, raised, your parents, and the neighborhood you grew up in?
I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, at Grady Hospital, which makes me one of the Grady babies. If you go there and you tell people where you were from and you say you're a Grady baby, that gives you status in Atlanta even after all those years. My parents moved to Cleveland for my father to attend law school and to follow in the footsteps of the pastor of our church, Dr. McKinney, Reverend Dr. McKinney, who was a pastor of Antioch Baptist Church, who was a Morehouse alum as he was. We always lived in the Glenville neighborhood, and my father became the first African American in the Glenville area in that ward to serve as city councilman, where he served for 13 years. I left Cleveland for a period of time to go to school and work in Boston and Cambridge, Massachusetts as a student at Harvard College, followed by a period of years seeking my master's in public health which is now the Chan School of Public Health in Boston. And after a period of time, and after becoming married to my college roommate, we returned to Cleveland, where he then attended Cleveland Marshall Law at Cleveland State University, where my father had attended. And I came to help with my mother, who was chronically ill. And that is what brought us back to Cleveland. We moved to Shaker Heights, as my parents had, after living in Glenville for many years. And that is where we raised our three sons, who are graduates of Shaker Heights High School and who attended college as well, with my youngest being a legacy graduate of Morehouse College in Atlanta.
Okay. What year did your family arrive to Cleveland?
My mother didn't come at first. She stayed in Atlanta, and that's why I was born there. And my guess is that she was not interested in coming because she was from a very close-knit family. And but she did come eventually, and I believe our family bought their first house in 1953, but she worked a little bit before that for the Navy Department in the late 40s, and then went back and forth between Cleveland and Atlanta while my father was in law school.
Okay. So your family do come from a very interesting background. So you can talk a little bit more about your family, like your mother and father's background.
My mother was born in Statham, Georgia. She was an only child, and she was actually the only child of my grandmother and her brother and sister She was the only child of the three. They moved to Atlanta in, my guess, in the 1930s, I would imagine. I'm not certain of that. But my great aunt took over the role of grandmother and godmother at the early death of my grandmother at age 37. She died the same year my mother graduated from college. And so she actually worked for the family who owned Coca-Cola, the Woodruff family, as a licensed practical nurse, working for various members of the family. And so we got a chance to see the different side of life by visiting those families who owned stuffed toy company, Coca-Cola, who physicians and what have you. And one of the families even had a flock of peacocks there. My great uncle, her brother, my great uncle, was the first person hired by the Marriott company to open its first hotel in Atlanta. And he worked there for a good portion of his career and became the employee of the corporation twice. And when he retired, Bill Marriott came to his house in a stretch limousine to pick him up. He also became inductee into the Atlanta Hospitality Hall of Fame before he died. My father was from a family of 15 children. He was the youngest. He was the only one who graduated from high school. Jones High School was one of only maybe 3 or 4 high schools in the state of Florida where Black students could go. And he went, and it was, and Jones High School only was a full high school that issued degrees, from high school degrees, only 9 years before he graduated. So he was one of the first cadres of students to receive a high school diploma from Jones High School in Orlando, Florida. And that high school is still open and graduating students today. And one thing I forgot to say is my mother graduated from the same high school as Dr. Martin Luther King, and she was there and attending at the same time. Most of my father's siblings were, some of them signing their name with an X, pick oranges in the fields, and there were a few who broke out. He and his second cousin, Andrew, became the first African American to be issued admitting privileges for Tampa General Hospital. And so my father and my cousin Andy were looked upon as role models for the rest of the family, who then went on to also go to college and to get engineering degrees and other degrees, and have done quite well in their lives. My mother got a teaching degree. In the days coming to Cleveland, it was difficult for Black women to get teaching degrees. And so she took a job at the Navy Department for a period of time before returning to Atlanta. And then when we got out of elementary school, she then did substitute teaching for the rest of her career and used her teaching skills combined with my father's interests in wanting to make certain that I would be a pristine writer and, and cultured and what have you. She used her teaching skills on us. My father was elected to the Cleveland City Council when I was in kindergarten, and and he was there my entire K-12 education, and became judge in the 8th District Court of Appeals, and he was the first African American to become that in that Court of Appeals in, I believe, 1971, where he stayed for the rest of his career.
Okay. I was wondering, how was it like growing up in Glenville in the 60s?
It was a good place to grow up. It was a very close-knit community. There was still the out-migration of Caucasians was still taking place. It was very much a Jewish community at that time. And matter of fact, the person who we replaced in city council was also a Jewish individual. We had only we had a short street, and there were still 2 or 3 white families, largely older women who lived on the street, who eventually left or passed away, and and some of whom we were very close with, including our next door neighbor who died in 1960 at the age of 93, and for whom my father was the executor of her estate. And every time I pass through my dining room, I think of her, because her dining room table graces my dining room today. And we had penny candy stores. We had movie theaters. We had a Kresge's and a Woolworths right in the same intersection. We had drugstores. We had furniture stores. We had just about everything you would want. There was a trolley that went straight from down St. Clair all the way to downtown, and buses, and so it was easy access to what there was multiple. There were no food deserts. We had A&P, we had Kroger's, we had Fisher, Fazio Costa, all within the same intersection. Our schools were within walking distance, although some students today would say that it was too far. But we walked, and that's probably why all of us were skinny, and many of them today are not. We did not have McDonald's until much later on. But the post office was on the corner of our street. We played kickball in the lot when it closed down in the evening. There was a church on the corner to which I attended church, the Sunday school. After I went to my church, I went to that church. And there were other churches, like Morning Star, that started out in Glenville, and I went to their summer programs. And I went to Glenville High School. I went to Oliver Wendell Holmes Elementary, which was only a half of a block from our house. I went to Empire Junior High. But I was and we had the Glenville Library within walking distance. And all of those things were wonderful for me because I was a devoted midget intellectual. And I love reading. The book clubs wanted you to read 10 books in the summer, so I read 25. We had morning talks in elementary school. They wanted you to we had one a month, so we could pick somebody important or to look into. You were supposed to have 3 visual aids. I had so many, my parents had to drive me to school. I was in clubs with the children of my parents' friends, junior Rembrandts, we were called. And we had to do a monthly one-pager on a person that the head of the club picked out. And we read them, and whose was the best got $1, which was considered a big deal. And I look back at the little girls, because we were like 6, 8, who were in that group. One of them ended up at Harvard with me. One of them ended up at Northwestern, and for junior year abroad at the American University of Lebanon. He married a prince from the Sudan and lived in the Middle East for a number of years. One was the daughter of parents who were both pharmacists. And one owned his own gas station, so it was not the Glenville community that many people would associate at that time, because you had everybody was there and everybody was accepted regardless of the station in life of their parents, whether they worked in a factory or whether they were a minister or whether they were a lawyer. But as one of the guys said, he could come on our street and he could see a different life that he knew about just from being in his family alone. And that was Glenville. The people who were ministers at all of the churches, their churches were there, they lived there, and we all benefited from the joint knowledge that we were able to get from living in the community with everyone. And it was the same in Atlanta. We did not miss. We weren't waiting for integration. We had everything we needed in our own community. And we had highly educated people. We had people in every field of endeavor. And so that's the way we felt about our community and the people we grew up with.
Okay, interesting. I was kind of curious, since Glenville being like one of the heart of Cleveland's Black communities, were you involved in any like civil rights protests, like the '64 student strike?
No.
Oh.
I was, for one, I would have been like 6th, 7th grade, and I didn't know so much about that.
Mm.
But I believed in equal justice under the law. I remember one of my first things I remember doing is when I was 4. I would call my friends up, 4-year-old friends, and tell them that we had to fight double standards of housing. Because I was listening to what my parents were saying and what they felt was wrong. My father was an early proponent of gun control, of voting rights, all of those things I would share with the children that I knew. And I may not have participated in those things in my time in Cleveland, but I certainly did at my time at Harvard. We took over I was an officer in Harvard AFRO, which was a political organization on campus. I supported the takeovers of University Hall, Massachusetts Hall, because we were against the university's policies of investments in South Africa way before people were aware of those things. And we fought to have the African American Studies Department be fully equal with other departments on the university campus. And as a result, it opened the first year that I attended. And I worked in that office with the chair and with faculty to sustain the department.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Probably something we can talk about a little later. So yeah, I know. So I know even living in Glenville, which is adjacent to Huff, do you have any memories of the riots that broke out in '66 in Huff, even though you're in Glenville?
I know that was happening,
Mm-hmm.
and it was of concern. But needless to say, having known about the Huff riots, when the riots came to our way, to Glenville, it was of great concern. When it was getting ready to start, Purpling Up, which was at the intersection of 105th and Superior, is where it started, and then it spread. I was at the hairdresser, and my father came and got me because he knew we were going to need to hunker down in our home, and didn't know how it was going to turn out. But I saw the fires. I heard the gunshots. I could look out of my bedroom window and see it all. And to see the smoldering remains of what had been a wonderful and vibrant neighborhood become less so.
Okay. So, of course, that's a year after King's. Do you know what the preparations for King's visit was? Like, what preparations were in store for his visit?
I know there were a lot of dignitaries there. He had visited other churches in the neighborhood. One of the larger ones, Corey Methodist, and so a lot of those people were there during the time. I do know that the way our school was designed, the stage was like between one side of it faced the auditorium, the other side faced the gymnasium. And what they did is all of the high school students were on the bleachers in the gymnasium, and they invited younger children to come and hear Dr. King. And they sat in the auditorium, and it was taped. The story of the tape is very interesting because for decades, it was basically lost. And a friend of our family, Ms. Ruth Livingstone, worked at Glenville High, and she was charged with being one of the people to get rid of all the stuff that was just kind of piled up in storage. And she was the one who came across this tape that is now replayed every third week of April for everyone to hear and remember. It was an audio tape, but it has now been embedded in a PowerPoint where there are pictures of everything that took place that day. Did I answer for you?
Oh, no, it does actually. I never remember. Did you see King before he came to Glenville High School?
Yes.
He came to Cleveland. Oh, what were those instances?
I saw him at my church.
Oh, okay.
I believe he came in 1963. I tried to find a poster, but I failed. Because, so as I said, the pastor of our church was a fellow Morehouse alum. And so that was one of the reasons that he came to our church. Our church has always been community activist, and so it fit right in. And they, and my father and Dr. King were both acolytes of Dr. Benjamin Mays, who is considered to be the architect of the modern civil rights movement. And so, as I say, I met him. Somewhere there's probably pictures of us, my brother and myself, shaking his hand or whatever, but I do know that I received a signed book of Five Short Freedom that was one of my cherished childhood items.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, and here's one other thing.
Okay.
My mother knew Coretta Scott King, and her address at her college, Antioch College in Ohio, Willow Springs. They met when they were college students.
Okay.
And when the Spelman Glee Club came to the town, we always hosted choir members, including Carolyn Jackson, the sister of Maynard Jackson, for whom I gladly gave up my bedroom for.
Oh, okay. Wait, before I go back to high school, I'm kind of curious. So the church, how was the church leadership? Like how involved were they? How actively involved they were in the community?
You talking about Antioch?
Antioch, yes.
Well, for one, when the soldiers came home from the war, you probably are quite aware that even after all of their losses and all of their bravery in World War II, people like my Uncle John, my father was a member of the Army, but he did not leave the United States during his tour. They found it difficult to get loans to buy homes. And even though you have people talking about the greatest generation and what have you, if you pay close attention, you'll know that those members of the greatest generation never seem to quite include us. So what our church did, it created the first church-based credit union in the city. And it was through that many individuals, church members and others, were able to buy their first homes as young people after the war. They, as the media often does, they look to certain individuals to get the opinion of the Black community. Our pastors were often one among those who they would seek counsel from, including Reverend McKinney, who's a longtime pastor in the church from the 1930s, and he died in 1963, I believe, followed by Kelly Miller Smith, who was also a Morehouse alum, who stayed only a short time, followed by Reverend Nelis Branch, who was there for for probably 20 years, who was actually a graduate of Yale. But they weighed in on the issues of the day. They made certain that it was clear to the people in the congregation and others that there are certain things that we should expect as individuals who were in the community, who that we were expected to vote and to know that their vote would matter, and basically also a mutual support society for each other, culturally, economically, and educationally. And that tradition has continued. There, you may have heard, or maybe not since you're fairly new here, the longtime ministry of Reverend Marvin A. McNichol, who then went on to become, after being here for more than 20 years, went on to be the head of the Rochester Closure Seminary, where one of the places where Martin Luther King was a student before he went on to Boston University. And he was one of those go-to people as well. He's written probably more than 15 books and remains active as a pastor emeritus, to make it clear, at least of some different ways of looking at the issues of the times.
Okay. Oh, I do want to jump back to Glenville High School. So, yeah, what are your memories when Dr. King visited, and what was your role that day?
I sat in the bleachers and soaked it all in. I remember watching the March on Washington in 1963, I believe, from my mother's little TV in her bedroom. And so to be able to see him speak at such close proximity, because I was very close to the stage, was an amazing thing. He encouraged us. He made us believe for sure that we had a role to play, that we were, just like my grandmother told my father and my father told us, you are somebody. He reinforced that, and we felt that we could go on and make a big contribution to the world. And we took him seriously. I know I did. And that is why, even though there were some at my school who weren't so sure I should apply to fancy schools, I didn't listen. And I applied to the one school I had always expected to go to, and in the only city I expected to live in Atlanta, to my mother's alma mater at Spelman College, to which I got a 4-year full scholarship. Brown University, University of Pennsylvania, and Harvard. Those are the 4 schools I applied to. And because they were schools that I admired, I researched, and I felt that I had the academic credentials to be competitive to go to. And so I did. And in my class, there were members who went to Northwestern, Dartmouth, Brown, and many other well-respected Duke, many well-respected institutions. And I can't help but imagine that even though they got the preparation and the encouragement from home, it didn't hurt that we were among the few kids who got to hear the message directly from our esteemed Dr. Martin Luther King.
All right. So, what was the student body's reaction after, after he, what do you think the impact of his visit on the school was?
We wanted to go out and save the world. Mm-hmm. And we tried.
Okay.
And we left Cleveland, many of them never to return because they found better opportunities elsewhere. And I should have gone too, but I didn't because I felt the need to support my mother and my father, because my mother had a horrific case of rheumatoid arthritis that resulted in 9 joint replacement surgeries in 20 years. And so I had to be there for her and to support my father so that we could do it as a family.
Okay. Now, I'm kind of curious. So the ones that you said that left, what did they end up doing? Do you have any knowledge of that?
Doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs, pastors, Wall Street. One person even became a well-known journalist for USA Today. CPAs. Some of them came back, but not all. And some of them were on Wall Street and then they came back. And many were drawn, I think, based on wanting to be close to their families. But in my case, my only family was my parents. All the rest of my family was in Georgia and Florida. And I love them and miss them. And I wanted to be closer. So we just traveled a lot.
Okay, interesting. This is something that came up to me. So by 1967, King was not like as popular as he used to be, especially among young people who saw him as like too old. So I was kind of.
They saw it. That wasn't it.
Mm-hmm.
But just think, he was only 37.
Yeah.
When he died, is LeBron 37 yet? What happened was that there became a shift from civil rights and nonviolence to Black power. That's what happened, and that is one of the reasons why people said we're getting murdered, we're getting this and that. Why aren't we fighting back? That was the reason. In addition, other parts of the community were very concerned because he was shifting his approach to poor people's campaigns. And just think about where he was when he was murdered. He was supporting garbage workers in Memphis who were underpaid and mistreated. And they wore signs saying that I am somebody. And who better to support people to know that who agreed that they were somebody than Dr. Martin Luther King.
So I'm also curious. So in his speech, what I have listened to, he does emphasize mobilizing students to get their parents to vote for Carl Stokes. Mm-hmm. So even though you're not old enough to vote, like, did you try to assist the campaign in any way, or if not, what are your memories of Stokes' historic campaign?
Let's see. Well, my family is, very politically active. My father was on city council, so he took the lead on those kinds of of issues.
Mhm.
You know, we knew Carl Stokes, we knew Louis Stokes, and I'm happy to say that, and I don't know if you're aware of this, do you know the date that Carl Stokes died?
I know 96. I forget.
He died on the anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, April 4th. And my father, my mother died at a relatively young age. Although despite all the things that she went through, she maintained a decent quality of life. She was never in a wheelchair. She was never a walker. She dressed up every day, looked fly. But after 5 years, he found another woman to love. And on April 4th of 1996, he went to Helena, Arkansas to propose to that woman. And she said yes. And 2 weeks later, he went to the courthouse because he remained active in the life of the court. And because he was thinking about getting married, he actually got new clothes, which I encouraged him. Woohoo, new clothes. You need that. And I bought shirts and ties to coordinate with everything. I think I was more excited than he was. And then he took one of those new suits out, what he bought, and the shirt and tie that I bought. And he went to the courthouse because they wanted to take pictures of all the retired judges. And so he went, and he went to the parking garage, and then the guy said, "Judge, what are you doing?" He says, "I'm here for a photo shoot." And he laughed and he said, "I guess they want to take our pictures before we die." And then he says, "Where the park?" He says, "Park in the usual space." And so he did. And he got out of the car. He put his judicial robe over his arm. And he walked to the elevator to go up to the court, pressed the button up, and collapsed. And it just so happened that one of the judges in the domestic relations court saw him and called EMS and did CPR until they arrived. And they called us, and they told me they had taken him to St. Vincent Charity, because that was one of many organizations where he served on boards and what have you. And I actually worked at St. Vincent for 10 years. And I went there, rushed, Frank and I rushed there. And so I knew all the places to check. The front desk to see what room he was in, wasn't there. The admitting, he said, "No, he's not here. He has not been admitted into the emergency room." He said, "There's nobody by that name here." So then they called the court. They called our pastor, which is interesting. And then they began calling hospitals all over the town, trying to find where they took him. And they had taken him to Lutheran. This is the same EMS who, while I was at St. Vincent serving as head of facilities design, had designed the EMS facility at St. Vincent. They took my father to another hospital and did not inform anybody where they were taking him. And they said, because I went to the head of EMS later, because by the time, so then I had parked at the way end of St. Vincent, thinking I was going to be there all day. And when they told me where it was, I ran as fast as I could to our car, and then tried to find Luther, because they didn't have GPS then.
Mm-hmm.
We found it, and I said, "Is he here?" And they said, "Yes." We went to his room, and he was gone. And being a person to not just shrug my shoulders and say, I wanted to find out why, because I know as a healthcare person, as a public health person who worked in several hospital systems, I know that is the way it was supposed to have been. And I'm telling you this because the civil rights movement that was inspired by Dr. King is not over. The fights have to be re-won with every new generation. So I talked to the people in the garage, and they said, nobody knew EMS, and they didn't, and nobody told them, the marshals or anything, where they were taking him. And then I eventually went to talk to the head of EMS, because I knew him. I had worked with him to design this. And he said, nobody knew who he was, so they figured they could take him wherever they wanted. There were 50 people there. Everybody from the court was watching as they tried to revive him. And then they called City Hall, which is next door, the building next door, and all of them came over. So there were hundreds of people watching and hoping. Then they tried to take him up the elevator. It was the stretcher was too big for the elevator. So then they took him up the steps in the grain. And then they tried to get out of the building. The closest door to their vehicle was locked, and nobody knew where the key was all this time long. And then he died, and they said, nobody knew who he was, so it didn't matter. It didn't matter who he was. And so I said to them, and so then he said, well, what will it take for you to not talk about this? I said, all I want is to talk to your staff so that they know that when they're in situations like this, that their heart is not hard, their hearts are not hardened, and that they know that it matters how they treat people, whether they be known or unknown, whether they're homeless or judges. I would just like the opportunity to share the perspective of one of those people who found out like I found out in one of your staff meetings. And he said, that can be arranged. How many years has it been? I never heard a word from him again. Mm. So I believe in equal justice under the law. I believe in the works and the approach of Dr. Martin Luther King. I believe in our Lord and Savior, just like he did. And I believe that even though the road is hard, that we must still seek to find those people who will work together with us, who believe in the Constitution, who believe in the preamble, we the people of the United States. I still believe those things, and I pass those things on to my children and my 6 little grandchildren in hope that one day the dreams of that I had when I felt that I had the audacity to go to Harvard University, when my parents had the audacity to go to college, and my father had the audacity to go and take his family's only coach, and my great uncle served as the bellman at Marriott for all those years, and my great aunt served the families of the aristocracy of this country, that we must have a marker at Glenville High School to commemorate that moment in hope that somebody will say, what does that mean? And for somebody like me to know, even though we are among the last individuals who have firsthand knowledge of what happened in those days, everybody else just knows about the mattress sale and what they may have heard from mothers and grandmothers like me.
What was the student body's reaction to King's assassination in '68?
You know how high school kids are. Loud. Loud, boisterous, wiggly, saying, when can we leave? The school was large at that time. You could hear a pin drop. We just sat there, sad. Seeing my high school or any other high school kids that quiet in my entire life. But I know what they were feeling because I felt it, because I was there.
Okay. Yeah, you say you were politically active in Harvard, so I'm kind of curious about the continuity of, like, growing up in an activist environment and being an activist at Harvard, especially with the university not having a large Black student population.
My class doubled the presence of African American students on the Harvard campus. And it didn't matter to us that we were a small percentage. Not at all. And we sat together and we worked together because we really weren't accepted. They weren't accustomed. I was saying they weren't accustomed to the presence of so many African American students on campus. Just to give you an idea of the numbers, my class had 30 Black women. There were 70 Black men. The previous class had 20 Black men and 10 Black women. And the other 2 classes had 4 Black women and about 10 Black men each. And so that was a small number compared to the number on campus. They just weren't, we weren't accepted in study groups. But that doesn't mean that everybody was mean, because I had a white roommate who I adored, and we still stay in touch today. And she became an attorney and an active member of the Urban League. And I think that it's because she believed in equal justice under the law. She had me as a person who she could communicate um, with and hear different perspectives. Um, and what's interesting is in recent years, I now have relationships with those people in my class, and which I accept because I was never mad at them. I felt that I was fine with the wonderful education that I had. The people in our class had the same credentials as they had. We were not the prototype affirmative action babies. We were very highly skilled. Many of them had gone to even prep schools in the Northeast. High test scores, GPAs, you name it, and skills in every area that you can imagine. And so I was happy in my little community. And there were many people later who were not Black like us who realized what a rare treat that was to know so many people so intimately cross class at your university, because oftentimes the numbers in a class are so large you don't even get to know all of them, not to mention everybody, so many people cross class. And so matter of fact, every Sunday there is a happy hour led by my class members on Zoom. And I attended when we talk about whatever is of interest. And it is a fascinating gathering. And I am one of the few Black members of my class who attend. Even though I told you the numbers of people in my class who were African American, I went to my 45th reunion a few years ago. There were 5 of us. We typically don't attend those gatherings, but I do. But they don't, because our experience was very difficult. And I went to one of the Black reunions, cross-class reunions, where the president of the university came, Drew Faust. And I was sitting next to one of our friends who's actually our son's godfather, who used to be on the senior team of Walmart. And she welcomed us. And he turned to me and said, "Wow, I guess I can come back now." I interview students for Harvard every single year for the last 30 years. Usually from, Shaker, Beechwood, University School, and HB, but largely from Shaker, because they have quite a few. And I make certain that they're of all ethnicities and all backgrounds. And a lot of my students that I interview are admitted. And the university invites me to be a marshal at the freshman convocation. But my heart is with the Black community of Harvard. We founded our own institutions when we didn't feel comfortable with the ones that were there. We had Black cast. We had our own dance troupe. We had our own choir. And as I said, we had a political organization. And one of the, have you heard of Peter Lawson Jones? He was a county commissioner for a number of years. He was there at the time. And one of his first plays that he wrote, he presented on the stage at Harvard. And I am the national president of the Kuumba Singers of Harvard College alumni, and we're close to 2,000 strong. And when I was there, we sang. It's more than a choir; it's a fellowship. And as I said, it's more than 50 years old. And today, it is one of the most beloved institutions on the Harvard campus. And to our surprise, based on the situation when we were there, it is now multiracial, multi-religious, but it still holds the core of the African American music. Music of the African diaspora, which includes music from the African continent and the Caribbean and the United States.
Okay. And then my last question is, can you just talk about your life after Harvard, in terms of like career-wise, family?
Okay. All right. Well, my career has been diverse. I started out at the Massachusetts Rate Setting Commission that set rates for nursing homes in the state of Massachusetts. I worked at Beth Israel and Tuscaloosa Medical Center in the medical labs, doing research studies. I came to Cleveland. I worked for Kaiser Community Health Plan. Worked for 10 years at the Sisters of Charity Hospital System at St. Vincent Charity Hospital. And then where I started doing grant proposals for the federal government, certificate of need applications and what have you. And from there, I went to Cleveland State University, where I served in a variety of positions, including strategic planning, going back to think that facilities design, which I'm sure you appreciate. We remodeled from nursing units to the building, built the building that connects to the hospital by a bridge, the St. Vincent Medical Building. Mm-hmm. I was the director of the first wellness center, corporate hospital wellness center in the city. And then I went to Cleveland State, where I was the director of corporate and foundation relations, which is largely health and human service related, for a decade, just like I had served for a decade at St. Vincent. From there, I served as the executive director of Cleveland Militant Minority Organ Tissue Transplant Education Program. And since 1998, I've also done consulting related to philanthropy, healthcare, health and human services grants, and I also served as the person who did all of the grant stuff for the Annual Development Corporation, and I've done things for organizations outside of the city of Cleveland, and now I spend a lot of my time doing grant reviews for city, state, and federal agencies.
Okay. That's all my questions. I appreciate the time.